There are two kinds of Toltecs. One is the historical group of people, indigenous people, called the Toltecs. That they lived in what today is Mexico. But the word Toltec translates as artist or man of knowledge. So the first group, the first Toltecs are the Indians, the historical Indians, but the second group are called the New Toltecs. So according to the tradition, the Toltec tradition, anybody that becomes a man of knowledge in any other tradition, well, becomes a Toltec. But like much of the Toltec way, its history resembles like a group of birds, a flock of birds in the sky, you know. You know it is there, but the form keeps shifting. Maybe this is due to its oral tradition of handling down bits and pieces of its past. Maybe its history has been intended only to serve liberating people in the present. And so almost anything goes. You know, any practice that helps you to know the self, to live more closer, you know, to your humanity, to bond with the spirit of the land, to rise your vibration, to be more organic, etc. Anything that helps you to grow and to awake goes into the Toltec path. But whatever the situation has been, there was a breaking point with the books of Castaneda. Castaneda offered everyone a starting point, a standard reference to one of its lineages, because there are many lines of Toltecs. Julian, who was the teacher of Don Juan, Julian prepared Don Juan for the assignment of teaching the West, white people. Julian required that Don Juan reads, you know, and study many other things, because someday he would be called upon to explain their ways to the white people. And as such teacher, Don Juan personifies thousands of years of an evolving system intended to break the shackles of ignorance. Don Juan lived his knowledge like a top-notch scientist. He learned also how to remain a passive observer of what was happening. So historical knowledge of the Toltecs, like everything else having to do with the pre-Hispanic past, is very limited and confusing. This is due not only to the lack of written documents or insufficiency of archaeological findings, but also to the difficulties arising from trying to comprehend a civilization that has been very different than us. It has a different perception of the world in relationship to the conceptual reference of contemporary thoughts and cosmovision. So how did the Toltecs live? What were they interested in? What kind of world did they perceive? These are the questions. And the answers to such questions would be equally difficult to answer even if the Toltecs themselves were present here in front of us right now. In the same way, direct observation of the behavior or way of life of any living indigenous people today does not necessarily give us substantial answers to similar questions. Actually, in spite of the years and years of field observation, studies beginning from the old report to the modern archaeological studies, the indigenous universe of the Toltecs especially, it remains a mystery. This arises from the Eurocentric scientific mind, you know, the European mind, which the rest of the world shares anyway. the notion that there is no universe or reality other than that which we perceive normally is wrong. Therefore, the indigenous world, present, past, is the same, seen through the non-indigenous eyes is a distortion from what the indigenous world is in itself, or how is perceived by someone who lives within this world. All historical studies, ethnological work in general, would have to be revised, reestablished, rewritten, beginning with a phenomenalistic, Don Juanistic proposal that the world, such as we perceive it, is a description. It's a description that we receive at the time we were born, and then we spend all our life constructing this world and incorporating ourselves into the social world that within the description. So, if we place an indigenous, a Mazateco Indian or a Shipibo Indian, and a man from the city, a businessman, in the same room or in the same spot in the jungle, in the mountains, they will find themselves in separate realities, and they will see different worlds. While the indigenous man see in the graphics on the wall, the statistics, things, he doesn't understand. The indigenous guy, these lines will have no meaning. But the man of the city or the business guy will look with worry, at the decline of his production, productivity of his business, etc. While in the woods or in the jungle, the indigenous man listen and learn from the trees. But the businessman will only see raw material to be used for commercial purposes or something like that. So naturally, if the indigenous man were to speak of the lessons he received from his brother the trees, or the spirit of the mountains, or the lakes, etc., the city man would think, oh, it's an idiot, this little superstitious poor Indian, without suspecting that he himself is a prisoner, trapped within his own description, trapped within his singular vision of the world. Only a man of knowledge, or a Toltec, is capable of crossing between worlds, between these parallel lines are called, which keep the worlds apart, to discover that there are countless worlds to be perceived and explored and experienced. So the historical Toltecs, indigenous people, well, they mysteriously disappear, but this happened when Quetzalcoatl also disappeared. This is the feather serpent. So when Quetzalcoatl left was the end of the Toltec civilization, and there are many tales and legends dealing with these matters. I'm not going to talk about this now, but however it was, towards the end of the 12th century, Tula was abandoned. Tula was the center of the Toltec Empire, So the Toltecs, wandering, they distributed themselves in different regions of America, which in a greater or lesser measure, they became, all these other civilizations, they became enriched by the presence of the Toltec sages. So starting from this period, due to the Toltec influence, the Maya attained highest level of civilization never before reached. They were more advanced than the Greeks at that time. So some of the groups originated from Tula. They settled in the proximity of Nayarit and Sinaloa. This was 5 centuries before the Spanish invasion would make them to take refuge in the high mountains where today they can be found. I found many Toltecs in the highlands of Guatemala. And it was from that region, from a basic, very small Toltec population that was formed the famous Aztlan. From there they proceed to split. They split in 12 tribes, and after a long exodus that was 200 years long, they did this following a message from the dreams, the dream world. They got a message that they had to go that place, and they moved to another part. Then they found, they created Mexica Tenochtitlan, which is the origin of Mexico, and then they became the Aztecs, and later on the Mayas. So the Toltecs, they transfer their wisdom and knowledge onto the Aztecs, and the Aztecs to the Mayas. So you see, it's a very complex story, and you cannot get it analyzing archaeological things, and because there are no written books or anything like that from that time. That's why I'm putting together this research based on other things, because if you make, an analysis like this guy made, I didn't watch the whole thing, but if you make an analysis like this guy made in these videos, you can get an idea of the indigenous people called the Toltecs. But that's not useful for you nowadays, we need to focus more on the wisdom of the men of knowledge, the Toltecs, men of knowledge.